I'm making another album, and at the moment I'm in the middle of a little mini series about creating your unique style. How to do that, why to do that, what to do, because that's one of the main reasons that I'm making albums at all. It's been for many years an obsession of mine to find my unique voice, and in many ways I think this is the journey of an artist. If you want to be an artist, then you want to be constantly developing and moving forward into a constantly shifting and new unique style. If you go and listen to the most legendary artists, the greatest artists who have stood the test of time, go to their Spotify profile or something like that and scroll down to the various different phases of their career, you will notice that they were constantly reinventing themselves. They have constantly changed what they were doing, which is of course based on what they did before, but taking them in new directions. And interestingly, those artists who were innovative at one point and who have stopped doing that tend to become less relevant. They start repeating themselves. They start becoming more of a craftist rather than an artist. So in other words, making different versions of the same table. One of my favourite artists ever, and still remains one of my favourite artists ever, is Prince. But I would argue, even though he remains one of my favourite artists ever, I would argue that in the latter stages of his career, he started repeating himself. He started becoming a craftist. A very good one, absolutely brilliant one, in fact, incredible performer, incredible musician. But in my opinion, he stopped moving forward. He stopped doing so much of the innovation, changing the way that he did things. And again, in my opinion, I think the reason that he is still regarded as one of the greatest artists of all time was because of the artistic portion of his career, when he was constantly changing what he was doing, reinventing himself. I mean, listen to the difference between Purple Rain, the album, and Parade. Such an enormous shift, but it was still Prince. He was reinventing himself and changing what he was doing, constantly pushing forward and developing. And in the last couple of episodes, I've shared some reasons why it's always been important to do this if you want to be an artist, and why it is now urgent. What was always crucial is now urgent because of the advent of AI music generators, how good they are becoming at producing generic music. So if you haven't listened to them yet, then click the link in the show notes, because that will take you to the website where I've created a playlist of all of the episodes in this series, and it would be most useful for you to listen to the preceding episodes before listening to this one. So on to this one, and we're going to start talking about exactly how you develop a unique style. Because I know that some people do it automatically without knowing exactly how they're doing what they're doing. But one of the things I do as a coach, and have done for many years, is look at what people are doing and essentially just break it down into, okay, so this is how they do that. Because understanding how something works doesn't destroy the magic, it allows you to create the magic. Even the most magical of experiences, even the most magical music can be understood in terms of the steps it took to get there, the process that the person went through, and also its individual ingredients. Now, bear in mind, that doesn't invalidate the experience of the music. It doesn't invalidate how magical that artist is, because it's like that magic is experienced at a different level of abstraction. You just hear the music and feel the emotion. I think people make the mistake of being very either or about this. They're like, either I just want to experience the music and I just don't want to know anything about it, I just want to feel it, or they say, I just want to analyze it and understand it at that level and nothing else. You can do both. I made this mistake as well. I studied music at university, and I allowed it to destroy my enjoyment of the music because I started listening analytically and critically to everything. The thing is, you don't have to do that. You can understand how it works, but then you can also switch to a much more direct experience. Just soak in the experience of the music. So that's what I'm doing here. breaking down what the steps are, how what we perceive as being unique is unique, what makes it unique, and how you can get there as well. Because when I say unique, I don't mean music from Mars that no one understands. And this is absolutely essential to understand. Often when people think about unique, they think, well, I don't want to make unique music because I'm worried about being an outsider. I'm worried that no one's going to like it. I'm worried that it's going to alienate people. Now, obviously, if you make music which is so unique people don't understand it, then that could well be the case. But if you think about this in terms of, on the one side of a sliding scale, you've got 100% plagiarism, and then the other side of the scale, you've got music that is so unique, so distinctive, so out of the realms of what we understand to be music that no one gets it. Well, you can choose to be more or less on that sliding scale. And understanding how this works will allow you to turn up with some of your pieces, some of your projects, some of your EPs, some of your albums, turn up or down this dial, this sliding scale. You can become more on the side of something that people understand, something that is familiar to people, or more on the side of something that is more unique, more unusual, more experimental, something that people have to get their heads around. But the process I'm going to share over the next 3 episodes, because I think I'm going to record an extra episode this week, over the course of the next 3 episodes, the process that I'm going to share with you is going to allow you to do that. It's going to give you the ability to turn up or down the dial on your uniqueness, depending on what you want to do and the situation and the project that you're working on. Now, the reason I'm doing this week is, number one, because I went and checked out Suno, where my mind was blown with how good the generic music it was making was. And if you're wondering about that, don't forget to check the link in the show notes for the playlist of all the episodes in this series. But the other reason is because as a result of that experience, I decided to create a new version of Make an Album with Mike, which of course will help you make an album, but in the course of making that album, help you develop your unique style. So essentially do exactly what I've been doing over the last few albums I've been making. And the preparation month for that version of Make an Album with Mike, it's Make an Album with Mike 6, or Make a Unique Album with Mike. The preparation session for that is happening very soon. So if you'd like details on this new version of Make an Album with Mike, a unique version of Make an Album with Mike about becoming unique, then send me an email, mike@makemusicyourlife.com, and I'll send you all the details. Anyway, on to the process, how to make unique music, because essentially there are 3 stages to becoming unique. The first stage is vision, which is what we're going to talk about today. The second stage is practice, and the third stage is synthesis. And by synthesis, I don't mean sound design, although that can come into it, but I don't mean sound design. I mean synthesizing what you have done from your practice, because the mistake a lot of people make, in fact, maybe the majority of people who haven't really thought through this, is that they stop at the vision stage. Essentially, they think, oh, I know, I've got this great idea for music that I want to make. I know exactly what it's like. And then they try to do it maybe a couple of times and it doesn't work. So they kind of give up and revert, because they're feeling so uncertain, they revert to what they already know. So in other words, they go back to the genres that are familiar because they know that sounds good. But the point of making unique music, the only way you can do it is through practice. I could call it practice, or I could call it testing or experimentation. Most of the experiments that you do in practice aren't going to work, but out of them not working is going to come some knowledge, some insight, some little bit of progress that will go into your unique style. So if you really want to synthesize a unique style, you have to get used to doing the practice. But anyway, I'm giving away the next episode of this podcast, I'll come back to the vision stage, which I think most people are fairly familiar with, although I do have a slightly different take on it. Because in terms of knowing what you want, of course, in the first instance, that's probably going to be about being inspired by your influences. So, for example, at the moment in my singing, I'm very inspired by a kind of school of singers from Kate Bush through Tori Amos, Lana Del Rey, Billie Eilish. I mean, I know they're not exactly in the same school, but a school of female singers that the way that they sing has this, it's almost theatrical element to it, and they use lots of different vocal deliveries and styles and ways of singing that really speak to me. Another thing I'm inspired by is the way that some rappers use wordplay, rhyme, in service of creating worlds. Two particular examples I'm thinking of are Tyler the Creator and MF Doom. And I came to this by listening to the Dissect podcast. Another example is Childish Gambino, and how they weave together these incredible metaphors, rhyme schemes, and wordplay to create these alternate realities. That inspires me too. And so what I'm doing with both songwriting and performing is influenced by those very, very different things. And here's an important element of being unique. When you're choosing your influences and inspirations, it's absolutely essential that you choose things that are very different. Of course, some of those influences and inspirations can come from what is kind of in the center of the bullseye, the kind of music that you make. If you're making house music, for instance, you could say, okay, one of my influences is the way Fortet creates his beats, for instance. But on top of that, you want to find influences that inspire you. It definitely wants to be inspiring to you. You don't want to just choose an influence that you don't like or doesn't speak to you, because then you're not being authentic. You're not really expressing yourself. So a way of doing this is by looking back into your musical history. In fact, this is one of the things I suggest everyone does, is that they make a playlist called their musical history, and they limit the number of tracks on that playlist, the number of songs on that playlist, to 10, maybe 20. And what they're trying to do is tell the story of their musical history, of what they loved, in 20 tracks. It's almost like a mixtape of their musical journey, because within that musical history, even things that you maybe want to forget or are like skeletons in your closet, I can promise you I've got more than a few, you will find some of these distant influences which inspire you and which you can put together with the things that are closer to the center of the bullseye for you. And putting those two things together creates something new, creates something that's unique. Because if you only use influences that are within your area, within what you're familiar with, what are you going to do? You're simply creating generic music. You're going to be creating music that is within a genre. And bear in mind too that even if you do want to stay within a genre in general, if you listen back to the last podcast where I talked about the difference between a genre and a style, so I used Fortet as an example. So he largely, not exclusively, but a lot of the music that he writes is house. But it sounds like Fortet doing house. The Fortetness of it is almost stronger than the house of it. So if we look at our sliding scale, he's towards the right? He's more on the artist end, even when he's making music within that genre. So coming back to this first stage of vision, a lot of people will stop just at their influences and inspiration. They won't think beyond that. But that's really just the first stage of the first stage, because the other thing you want to bring into this is the unique purpose of the music you're making. I mean, who else who has ever lived on the face of this earth has ever had exactly the same experiences and experience the same emotions as a result of those experiences. There's literally no one who has had the experiences that you have had and who has taken the meaning that you've taken from those experiences. This is one of the things that makes you unique. And purpose is so important in music. It's so helpful as well in making music. And it can also help us to sort through the many influences and inspirations that we want to use. I mean, let's go back to Fortet as an example. If you know Fortet's music, I mean, when I think about Fortet, I know what it makes me feel. It has a certain atmosphere to it. It gives me a certain kind of experience that sometimes I am looking for. Sometimes I feel like listening to Fortet because I know what it is, the experience that Fortet gives me. And it's a wide-ranging experience. It's not limiting the kind of music he makes, because he does make a wide variety of music. It is eclectic music, but it has a certain emotional valence to it, a certain emotional quality to it. It gives me a certain experience I'm looking for. The same is true of James Blake. The same is true of Tom York, Billie Eilish, Lana Del Rey. All of these people, MF Doom, they give me a certain experience. So something that you want to look at, which I think very few people do, when you're thinking about a unique style, when you're creating this vision of what it could be, is what are you going to express? What is the authentic core experience that you are attempting to get across? What do you want people to feel? And not just, well, I want them to feel happy, but specifically how, like what type of happiness? For instance, Fortet, again, gives me a feeling of bliss, calm, contentment, and I could almost describe that in textural terms. It's very bright and sparkling and smooth and shiny, Fortet music, but it's got this underbelly of roughness, right? So I'm literally just off the top of my head describing how Fortet makes me feel in sensory terms, because we experience music obviously through our senses. We experience everything through our senses, in fact, but music really is one of those art forms that gets straight to it. It creates a sensory experience, not just audio, but also, why do we refer to music as being rough or shiny or polished? It's because of this sensory experience that it creates. So in terms of creating your vision, that's something that you want to understand, or at least guess or have an idea of where you're going as well. But in saying all this, and this is very important what I'm about to say, recognize that this vision is not a goal exactly. I mean, it kind of is, in that you're moving towards that, but as you'll find out from the next couple of episodes where I talk about practice and synthesis, you don't want to hold too tightly onto what you think you want your music to be, because it simply doesn't work like that. You will have an idea of what you want, this vision, and it has to change. You have to allow what happens and allow yourself to be surprised. I've seen this time and again where people get too fixated on this vision of music they have in their head, this audio vision. I know exactly what I want it to sound like. The thing is, that vision in your head is simply an idea that hasn't been put into the real world. In other words, you haven't tested it to see if it works, if it's something that has the effect that you think it will, or essentially, importantly, whether you can actually do it. And this is why quantity, practice, experimentation, what we're going to talk about in the next episode, is so essential. Because you need to run these ideas through the actual process of making music, of actually finishing music. And that's why I think that making albums is the very best way to develop your unique style, and why I'm making this new version of Make an Album with Mike. Anyway, I just said that one of the things that might mean your musical vision doesn't turn out exactly as expected is that quite often people will have a musical vision that they can't do in this moment. They can't create in this moment. For example, as I said at the start of this episode, I'm very inspired by singers like Kate Bush, Tori Amos, Lana Del Rey, Billie Eilish. And of course, I have chosen some singers who are incredible vocalists. I am not that. Right? I mean, apart from anything else, I'm a 51-year-old man, but simply in terms of my vocal ability, I'm not there yet. Same can be said of the way that MF Doom and Tyler the Creator and rappers like that write their lyrics, the way that they use metaphors, the way that they play with words, different meanings. I'm nowhere near that level of skill. So one of the things that I have to recognize is this vision isn't going to be what I expect, because in my mind I can think, wow, wouldn't it be great to have an artist who sang like Billie Eilish but used the wordplay of MF Doom? Yeah, that would be great. I'm sure it would. I'm sure it could work. But am I going to be able to do that in the foreseeable future? So what I need to do is treat those influences, those inspirations as exactly that. Something that I am moving towards, not something that I am ever going to be able to completely reach. Because to build my artist career, to build my artist business, which I want to do sooner rather than later, I need to start releasing music at the highest quality that I can now. And in order to do that, I need to understand what my strengths are now. Bearing in mind that my strengths will always be improving, that I will be developing my strengths, of course, but where I am now, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And how can I turn my weaknesses into strengths? Notice I said turn my weaknesses into strengths. I didn't say improve my weaknesses, because your particular constellation of strengths and weaknesses are one of the things that make you unique. So in other words, your weaknesses make you unique as much as your strengths do. So by understanding and accepting that you have certain weaknesses and certain strengths, and making music that plays to your strengths and either sidesteps or even makes a virtue of your weaknesses, you are going to be expressing who you are as an artist right now. And you are going to be expressing your unique abilities. One of the things that I would suggest that you do, once you've had a think through what the different influences and inspirations might be, and then what it is you are going to make music about, what unique experiences and emotions you want to express in your music, then comes the stage of figuring out what your starting setup is going to be, which takes into account your specific strengths and weaknesses. And it can also take into account what you want to improve. So, for example, I know that at the moment one of my strengths isn't singing. However, I know that it could be. I know that if I make music which almost is a forcing function for me to become much better at singing, and if I can find a unique vocal style which plays to my current strengths and de-emphasizes my current weaknesses, then I'm automatically going to be making much better music. So my starting template is simply a keyboard and a voice with a very simple beat. I'm not even paying much attention to the rhythm, because that's not going to be so important to my unique music at this point. It's simply going to be a color. And I would recommend that when you're creating a starting template, what I call your unique instrument, UE for short. So when you create your unique instrument, your UE, you want to focus on simplicity, incredible simplicity, and really zero in on your strengths. So for me, playing the piano, the keyboard is a strength. And also, if you want something that you would like to develop, that's going to form an inherent part of your unique music. So for me, the voice. Because when you have an idea of those three areas, your influences and inspirations that you're going to bring into the mix, the experiences and emotions that you're going to express, and then the setup which reflects your strengths and weaknesses, your particular unique abilities. Then you are ready to start practicing. You are ready to start running the experiments, which is what we're going to talk about in the next episode of the album. And remember, I'm running a new version of Make an Album with Mike. It has the same overall structure with the same type of deadlines, but there are going to be new music games, new processes, new thinking tools that are all focused on helping you develop a unique style while also making a quality album. Because making unique music was always crucial, and now with AI music generators that are becoming so good at making generic music, it is now urgent. And if you're interested in doing that, simply send me an email, mike@makemusicyourlife.com, saying you want details of the new version of Make an Album with Mike, and I'll send them to you. So with all that said, I'm going to stop talking about making a unique style and start making one.